So welcome everyone to session 2 of the book of Job, Job's response to misery. We didn't have class last week, but the week before I did an introduction to the book of Job, gave a little bit of background and history and basically the layout of the book. So today we're actually going to get into the text. The first part of the book of Job you could call a prologue. It's written in prose. It's chapters 1 and 2. We may actually get done a little bit early today because 2 chapters is a very tiny part of the book of Job. But the end of chapter 2 is a convenient place to stop. It's a good breaking point. So I don't want to get into the poetry part of chapter 3 until next week. So we'll just do the first 2 chapters today. You can print out an outline if you like on the St. Andrew website. There's a link available to print out the outline of today's class. I have a priming the pump question to start out with. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Satan or the accuser or the adversary today. So for a priming the pump question, excuse me, when you read or hear the word Satan or satanic, what comes to mind? What is Satan? What's your personal definition of Satan or satanic?
Evil.
Just unmute yourself and speak up.
Evil.
Evil. Yeah.
I would say self-centered to the point of not seeing others as human.
Okay. Self-centeredness.
Fear.
Ah, interesting.
Halloween.
What did he say?
Fear
Fear?
and Halloween.
Okay.
I think of Satan with respect to the ancient religion that had the sons of darkness fighting the sons of light on earth to see who was going to win.
Yeah. Zoroastrianism, the ancient Persian religion, had a god of light and a god of darkness that would supposedly were going to do battle at the end of the world.
Another adjective, Steve, cunning.
Cunning. Yes.
Calculating.
Yeah. All very good
Mischievous.
ideas. I read some time ago one of my favorite definitions. I'm going to read it so I don't misquote him. This is from Dr. Harry Wendt of Crossways International. This is his definition. He calls it demonic rather than satanic, but that's the same thing. Is every power, person, and influence that would sidetrack us from living to serve God and others. That's Harry Wendt's definition. One point you can draw from that is that even good things can become satanic. Hard work is good, but if you spend so much time at work that you're ignoring God and family, your work has become satanic, right? Or demonic, leading you away from things that matter. Okay, let's get into it then. I'll say more about the Satan in a bit. I listed 2 references just to give credit where credit is due. I will mention these books again. I did last time, but I'm using 2 books to help me in addition to my Bible. The first is titled Job, a New Translation with Introduction and Commentary by Marvin H. Pope. He's professor of Northwest Semitic Languages at Yale University. That book was published in 1965. The second is Job, a New Translation by Edward L. Greenstein, Professor Emeritus of the Bible at Bar Ilan University in Israel. And that was published just last year. So going through the outline here, the prologue, as I mentioned, was written in prose. This act has 5 scenes, so I'm going to go scene by scene through the prologue. Scene 1, this is chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. I think Lloyd asked the question 2 weeks ago about the land of Uz. Is it a real place? Or,
Yeah.
if so, where is it? So I had to do some research on that.
Sorry, Steve.
That's fine. I enjoy it. The land of Uz, I couldn't find any reference that identifies it with any modern place name, right? You know, it would be nice to pin it down exactly to the location of a modern place. Couldn't find that. But we do have some ideas. It was probably northeast of Egypt. And I get that from Jeremiah and Lamentations. There are, other than the book of Job, there are 2 mentions of the land of Uz as a place name, Jeremiah 25:20 and Lamentations 4:21. In Jeremiah, God symbolically gives Jeremiah a cup of wrath that Jeremiah is to deliver to the nations and make them drink from the cup of wrath. There's a list of nations in there that starts in Egypt and goes generally toward the northeast, right? It's Egypt, next the land of Uz, then the cities of the Philistines, then Moab, then Edom, Moab, and Ammon. So starting from Egypt, roughly to the northeast. Uz is the first one mentioned after Egypt, which would imply that, yeah, maybe the land of Uz was adjacent to Egypt. In Lamentations, Lamentations is poetry. As I mentioned last week, Hebrew poetry depends on parallelism. Lamentations 4:21, that couplet, that particular couplet, the first phrase mentions Edom, the second phrase mentions Uz, which we can probably infer that either Uz and Edom were very closely connected or geographically adjacent or something like that. So,
So it's moved out of the realm of mythological then.
yes. Well, if we can, like I said, it's mentioned in 3 places, including Job in the Bible. So it probably was actually a place. Point C there, southern Edom or northern Arabia. We can get that from Job's friends, mentioned in Job 1 verse 11. For example, the first of Job's friends that is mentioned is a guy named Eliphaz. Eliphaz in Genesis was a son of Esau, Jacob's brother. According to Genesis, Esau settled in the land of Edom. So Eliphaz with his son, one of the sons of Eliphaz was named Teman. In Job, Eliphaz is referred to as a Temanite. So that's another connection to the land of Edom and Esau. So it was probably in southern Edom or northern Arabia. Interesting point. In the 20th century, when the book The Wizard of Oz was translated into Hebrew so Israelis could read it, it was translated as The Wizard of Uz. So there's a connection there apart from the Bible.
Well, thanks, Steve. I was wondering that for the last 2 weeks, I was wondering about that question for the last 2 weeks. So thank you for looking it up and being so studious about cracking it down. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was a good question. Unfortunately, I can't point to any modern city that would show us exactly where it was, but southern Edom or northern Arabia. Let me try to share my screen, okay? See if this works.
So there wouldn't be any archaeological evidence. They don't know exactly where to dig, I guess, huh?
Correct.
Offhand, I would say that this guy is Jewish.
So, can you see this map?
Ooh, look at that.
Yes.
Fellow who wants maps.
Yeah, okay. Now, on the left-hand map is back then, right? I don't know exactly when then is, but it shows the place names that we see in the Old Testament. You can see south of Israel is Edom there. So that gives you roughly an area. I would guess somewhere in the southwestern part of Edom would be where the land of Uz was. That would put it roughly in the southern part of the modern country of Jordan. Okay, let me turn off the sharing here. Okay, everybody's back. So let's continue. Point 2, Job was righteous and blessed. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. In other words, 10 children. That would be quite a blessing. 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels. That adds up to 10,000. 500 yoke of oxen and 500 donkeys, adding up to 1,000. Now you can see all of these add up to powers of 10. So that's probably a clue that this is from a folk tale, right? Probably nobody actually counted Job's property. So this probably came from a very ancient folk tale. 2 weeks ago, I mentioned some of the literary forerunners of the book of Job, other stories that involved the suffering of the innocent. And so there's quite a wealth of material that the author of Job could have drawn from in writing this book. Now, his children may not have been as righteous as Job. The sons evidently lived apart from their parents. These were all grown children. Their sons lived apart from their parents, and apparently they threw parties, maybe birthday parties. They took turns hosting parties anyway, and they invited their sisters to come along. Their sisters probably still lived with the parents. It was traditional back then that unmarried women would live with their parents until they did get married. So they were a bit of a partying group. Job did not attend these parties. Of course, why would a son invite his parents to a party? But also from Job's point of view, it may have been unseemly for the patriarch to attend a party hosted by one of his children. The patriarch would be the one that would be expected to host. So he may not have even wanted to attend these parties. But after every one of these parties, Job offered sacrifices for his children. The book says he would rise early in the morning. That means probably doesn't refer to the time of day as much as soon as possible he would do this. His children are evidently very important to him, and he wanted to offer sacrifice because it may be they cursed God in their hearts. So just in case the children sinned, Job would offer sacrifices. That's the end of scene 1. Now the scene shifts to the heavenly court. Now we're looking in at heaven. The heavenly court had the way people back then thought of heaven is the way they thought of it. Their model was human kingdoms, right? So the heavenly court had court officials called heavenly beings in the NR3 translation, literally sons of God in Hebrew. Now this included the Satan, the accuser. The Satan was sort of a heavenly prosecutor. This official would look for sinners and prosecute their case before God's judgment. One interesting thing I think is very, very interesting is about the development of Satan throughout the Bible. One example that I have here on the outline, in 2 Samuel 24, the Lord incites David to sin. The Lord incites David to take a census for the purpose of determining the strength of the army that he could raise. The sin in that is that that's doubting. That's doubting God. Not having trust that God would bring victory, having to number your troops to make sure that you have enough. And at the beginning of 1 Samuel, Samuel himself leads the Israelite troops into battle against the Philistines. God keeps telling Samuel, oh, you don't need that many troops. You don't need that many troops. Samuel ends up leading a pitifully small number of Israelites against a massive Philistine force. And because of the help of God, the Israelites win. So that was sort of the expected behavior. You know, you don't need to count your troops. God will deliver the victory. So in 2 Samuel 24, David counts the troops, which is a sin. In 1 Chronicles 21, which was written a couple hundred years later, Chronicles repeats some of the stories in Samuel and Kings. But it was written later, and in 1 Chronicles 21, it's Satan that incites David to sin, not the Lord. The chronicler was evidently uncomfortable that God would be tempting David to sin, so he has Satan that incites David to sin. Now, the Satan roamed the earth, roaming, roving, spying, watching people, going to find out who's naughty or nice and prosecute the naughty people. One interesting fact I ran into that this book was it took its final form during the Persian period. So that would be 538 BCE and for the following roughly 200 years after that. The Persian secret police were sometimes called the eyes of the king. So that may be where the author of Job got the idea of Satan roving about the earth. In the early Christian tradition, in the New Testament, we can look at 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around looking for someone to devour. So that was the early Christian point of view of the Satan. Point 2, God says to Satan, I'm paraphrasing here, this is not a quote. Have you noticed my servant Job? He fears God and turns away from evil. God sings the praises of Job to Satan. Satan says to God, well, of course he fears God. You have given him every blessing. If you remove his blessings, he will curse you to your face. God says to Satan, all that he has is in your power, but don't harm Job himself. This is the first step. So God hands Job and his property over to the Satan to see what will happen. Scene 3. Now we're back on earth. Chapter 1, verses 13 through 22. A series of terrible news is delivered by messengers. It's not specific whether these are human messengers or divine messengers, in other words, angels. Could be either one from the Hebrew word. The first thing that happened, first bad news, Sabean stole oxen, donkeys, and killed the servants that were tending them. So his oxen and his donkeys are gone now. Sabeans are Arabian nomads. These folks who were from the Arabian Peninsula. You may remember that during Solomon's reign, the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon for his wisdom, to seek his wisdom. Well, Sheban and Sabean, that's the same people, right? The same nation. Second thing, a fire of God burned up the sheep and servants and the servants tending them. I guess that would probably be lightning if I had to guess, fire from God. So his sheep were destroyed and then the servants tending them. Next thing that happened, Chaldeans carried off the camels and killed the servants tending them. Chaldeans were from Mesopotamia. The Chaldean mountains are in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, the location of Babylonia. And then, tragically, Job's children were killed in the collapse of a house. His children were attending one of the son's parties. I think it was the eldest son that was hosting this party. A wind came from the desert and shook the house. The four corners collapsed and the roof crushed all of his children. Terrible news. Job grieved, but did not sin by cursing God. Job said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there." Probably returning to the mother's womb is a metaphor for being buried in the womb of the earth after you die. Job also said, "The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." So yeah, I guess easy come, easy go would be a modern way of putting that.
Steve, question.
Yes.
With that statement, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, blessed be the name of the Lord. Wouldn't it depend on how you said that statement, whether you were cursing God or not?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And in fact, there are places in these first two chapters where it said that Job said that someone blessed God, but the Hebrew really means cursed. It's a euphemism, right? This could be too, right? I think you're correct. Scene 4. Now we go back to heaven for this scene. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 6. The Satan again returns to the heavenly court from roving the earth. I probably should mention, just to point this out, I think I have before, but when the accuser, when the prosecutor prosecutes a sinner, this is not after the person dies. There was no reward or punishment after death at this time. Everyone simply went to Sheol, the abode of the dead, after they died. The reward and punishment happened on this earth. If you were a righteous person, you would be blessed by God. If you were unrighteous, you would be punished by God. So this punishment happens during your lifetime, and that's what's so confusing to Job. He's trying to figure out what he did wrong, right? Because obviously, if he was being punished, he must have done something wrong. At least that's what Job's friends tried to tell him. But Job is confused. So Satan returns to the heavenly court, and God points out to the Satan Job's persistent faith in spite of adversity. So again, God is singing the praises of Job, sort of rubbing the Satan's nose in it, if you will. And that makes Satan want to up the ante here. He says, quote, "skin for skin," probably means something like value for value. When you're doing a trade, like if you're bartering with animal skins, you're not going to trade away a more valuable skin to receive a less valuable skin. So value for value, Job is reacting in proportion to what he's received. The Satan says, all that people have, they will give up to save their lives. God agrees, but the only requirement this time is don't kill him, spare his life. So now back on earth, scene 5, chapter 2, verses 7 through 13. Job is inflicted with loathsome sores, it says. This is often rendered as boils. The 6th plague against Egypt in Exodus 9 was a plague of boils. Same word. So Job took a potsherd to scrape himself and sat among the ashes. It's really unclear exactly what potsherd is. When you break a clay pot, it breaks into shards. So potsherd is a shard of a clay pot. We're not exactly sure what he was doing this for, whether it was maybe to scratch the itching that he had. People were known to disfigure themselves when they were under terrible grief. So they would, so maybe that was what he was using it for, as a kind of cutting. We're not really sure, but he sat among the ashes. Ashes, of course, refer to grief or mourning. People would put on sackcloth and ashes when they were mourning. So he was mourning his own life because of all of these troubles that came upon him. Now, his wife said to him, "Curse God and die." It sounds like she's advocating suicide. Curse God and die. But Job refused to do that. He did not kill himself. In fact, he says, "Shall we receive the good from God and not the bad?" We have to take both, don't we? The book says Job did not sin with his lips. If we compare that with chapter 1, verse 22, where it says Job did not sin, this says Job did not sin with his lips. We can only imagine what was going on inside his head. Point 4, Job's 3 friends heard of his troubles and came to visit him. There was Eliphaz the Temanite. I have in my notes here, see Genesis 36. That's where the descendants of Esau are all, the genealogy starting with Esau are laid out. We see that Eliphaz was the name of one of Esau's son. One of Eliphaz's son was named Teman. So if this Teman had started a clan or founded a city, then their descendants would be known as Temanites. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. These are probably locations in either Edom or northern Arabia. Now, when his 3 friends got to him, Job was so disfigured by his suffering, or the boils, or cutting himself, or whatever, that his friends didn't recognize him. It was that bad. They wept, tore the robes, and threw dust on their heads. Again, signs of mourning. They sat with him 7 days and nights without speaking, before anybody said a word. They just sat with him. That brings us to the end of chapter 2. And as I said, I don't want to go into chapter 3 because that's the discourse. That starts the discourse between Job and his 3 friends. They debate about why these things might be happening to him. But I did want to have some points to ponder here at the end. Job's friends sat with him in silence for 7 days. Even so, could their presence have been helpful to Job, even though they weren't speaking? In what ways is it important simply to be with someone who is suffering? Anyone have some comments on that?
I would say it was pretty important.
Yeah. I guess the fact that they just showed up probably meant a lot to Job.
I mean, that's what, we've been taught in the Lutheran Church over the decades, that if you're trying to comfort someone that's in sorrow, that you don't have to have all the answers immediately. You just have to be there, right?
Right.
And then Job himself is a pretty noble character in that he doesn't, he may not curse God with his lips, but he may be thinking some pretty awful things. But when he does speak, he doesn't curse God. So he's a noble character as well.
Yeah. noble but confused as to what's going on. Later, we'll see how Job's friends try to convince him that he must have done something wrong, so just go ahead and repent. And Job is saying, what? I don't know what I'm repenting for, right?
Well, one thing with the coronavirus, that's what's making it hard for people who are extremely sick from the coronavirus, and they can't have any visitors.
Yeah.
And so they're totally isolated. And then the people who are treating them are in these costumes to protect them from the virus. And it's a very alienating situation for what, 200,000 people now?
Yeah, for sure.
I think the fact that they didn't say anything for a while is probably good in light of what they say later, which is especially helpful.
Yes.
And since I have mental health problems, I've had a lot of people say things to me that are just tremendously not very helpful. And, oftentimes it would have been better if they had just sat quietly with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, they end up to be pretty judgmental, his three friends, actually.
Yeah.
Struck by a couple of things. One is that 7 days of his friends just sitting there and not saying anything is, I mean, 7 is the eternal number, right? It's the number of wholeness. And so
Yeah.
it must have felt like eternity because people are problem solvers. And they must have felt like they were there forever, not solving his problem. And that must have been really hard for his friends too. The other thing that struck me just now is that his friends didn't recognize him after he was so much in torture. And that foreshadows the walk to the road to Emmaus, when Jesus was tortured and killed and reappeared, and his friends didn't recognize him either. I wonder if there are more stories in Jewish tradition, folklore, that use that imagery to talk about how somebody changes and then his friends don't recognize him. I don't know. I just think that's an interesting detail to include, considering what happens later.
Yeah. Anybody else have any comments about what we've gone over today?
I'm puzzled by why God is even bothering to bargain with Satan. You know, what are you doing betting with Satan? That doesn't strike me as being a very godlike thing. And I'm wondering, is there a bigger meaning here, or is this, is it just a plot device?
Yeah, one thing to remember is that these heavenly officials, in Hebrew, they're called sons of God. So they certainly didn't have equal status with God, but they were evidently pretty important according to this story. It does seem rather ungodlike to make a bet with the Satan. And the thing is, I don't know, what were they betting for? Neither one of them had any skin in the game, did they? I mean, that's, I guess maybe bragging rights, but the only person who paid was apparently Job. Well, and Job's children who were killed, and all of his servants, and it seems like quite a cruel story.
I have a comment on the heavenly beings. 55 years ago, from my freshman college English class, studying Greek drama. Didn't Greek drama have this thing called the chorus?
Yes, yes. That's a good point.
And they were sort of judgmental too. I mean, it's been a long time since I've read something on that. But
Yes.
Well, I'm wondering if it's just some of this is just the the Jews trying to understand, to learn about God and to say, why does God, I mean, we ask the same question now. Why does God let bad things happen to good people? I mean, there's a book written by a rabbi. And I'm wondering, I think a lot of the things that are told, especially early in the Bible, are trying to be answers to questions like this. Why does God let this happen? And if you can explain that there's something going on up in the heavenly court, I don't know. That's just one way of looking at it for them.
I agree. I think that's the starting point is it's puzzling that people suffer and we can't seem to figure out the reason. And this tale has the strange interaction between the Satan and God, because the whole thing is strange. The whole thing is strange that innocent people suffer. And so you can expect strangeness in the story.
Well, I think the Greeks ascribed human properties to the gods so that they could explain why bad things happened. They let the gods be jealous. They let them, they would have easily let them make a bet. And it may have been other people in the region back in those centuries also ascribed human properties to God and Satan. And the goal was to have an explanation for why bad things happen. If God was rolling the dice on you, why?
May not come up with double seven.
Yeah.
Well, the book of Revelation is somewhat similar, Steve, in the sense that the scenes shift back and forth between the battles in heaven versus what's going on earth.
Yeah.
But I think as people are saying, the Greek analogy is really apropos, because it's not only when bad things happen in the Greek world, but everything really, wasn't it? Tragedy, comedy, love, murder, killing, war, victory. The whole thing was preordained by Zeus and all the other, all his godlike companions. So this is kind of a way, again, maybe a myth to explain things why things are the way they are.
Yeah.
And there was mischief makers.
I immediately think of Puck in Shakespeare.
Mhm.
It makes a great story, right?
there's also the coyote figure.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Loki in Norse mythology.
You got the PSU library in your background, Lynn. I see that. That's beautiful.
Thank you. I'd like to change up where I am every once in a while.
I spent lots of hours and lots of days in that building reading mythology.
And another thing with the where the children were killed when their house collapsed. Did anybody happen to see the video of the Izmir quake and the apartment building that just collapsed in a matter of seconds?
Horrendous.
Yeah.
Yeah, simply horrendous. There had to be people inside.
If there's any, it's a weird story and it's problematic to get your head around it. But if there's any comfort for me, you hear people kind of making that assumption that if something, you're poor, therefore you didn't work hard, or, your kids are hungry, or your kids get into drugs, you were a bad parent. All of this cause and effect of bad things happening. And one thing this book of the Bible makes clear is it isn't necessarily because of what we did. And to me, that's comforting.
Yeah.
I
It
also
is
find,
what it is, says Michelle Obama.
I also find it interesting that all of the deaths and the destruction of Job's family and property were all natural disasters. It wasn't just that Satan or God snapped their fingers and they were gone. They disappeared. They were natural disasters. And so for people of that time, having an explanation of how natural disasters play in with everything must have also been of great interest because they didn't know how all those things worked.
It was true that people's fortunes rose and fell rather dramatically. I mean, we think losing 10 children is just incredible, but it happened. People lost whole families and lost everything, and then maybe came back from it through another change of fortune. People didn't. I was watching a thing on Rome the other day, and it was incredible. It was like maybe you could expect 2 of your children to make it to adulthood. I mean, these people were adults, so they were probably more precious because they had made it that far. But having your children die was a lot more common than it would be today. Losing your animals, all that stuff it happened. You know, it's like there was lots of piracy, lots of every word I can think. Like,
I remember a Mexican literature course I took in college, and the story was amongst the Catholic families, if the child died in childbirth or died in the womb, that was actually a blessing because they didn't have to go through the suffering of life. I mean, that's how sometimes people rationalize these things. When life is short, when life is mean, and then you die, right?
So the sheep died maybe from a fire from lightning, and the children died from the wind and the collapse, but then the camels were stolen, and somebody else was stolen too. Was
Right.
it-
The Sabaeans stole the oxen and donkeys, and the Chaldeans carried off the camels.
Yeah, so it wasn't all natural disasters.
Yeah.
That's true, but they were all common events. Maybe
Yes.
put it that way. So
Yeah.
God
Yeah.
didn't
were-
just snatch them.
exactly, there was nothing magical about the way this happened.
And probably even for the ancient world, I mean, for things like that to happen one right after the other, that had to be pretty extreme even in the ancient world, I would say. At least the way the story's written, you know, one right after the other.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Before one messenger barely got done speaking before another messenger came, right? It was just all in a row.
No time to process it, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, we have the benefit of 3,000 years of reflection to come up with the answers, but poor Job, he had to react real time. And he seemed to react well, at least in the first 2 chapters, Steve. You know,
Yeah.
again, the man doesn't curse God. He says, and it's not just stoicism either. It seems like he still puts his faith in God, that God's in control. And this is, I may not understand it, but I'm not going to curse God, even if my wife tells me to do so.
Yeah, that's right.
He does change his tune, as we know, but at least in the first 2 chapters, he's a pretty noble guy in my estimation.
Right. That's true.
but what we're talking about is how close does a story come to reality? Like they made the character pretty noble. They used things that could have happened. But basically, it's such a story thing to have these things happen in all one right after another. I mean, that's real theatrical. I mean, it just seems like we shouldn't try to make reality too much out of it. It's a good dramatic technique or oral.
Yeah, if you read Aristotle's Poetics, he talks about what the essence of tragedy is. It's not an epic. You don't describe everything, but you stick to your point. You have one point to make, and then you move that. What you describe or write is all pointed to that main objective. So yeah, read the Gospel of Mark, and Jesus' stories and miracles are much the same way. It's one right after the other.
Yes.
So the one of the phrases that I keep in my mind is blaming the victim. When we come across someone who's suffering, there's a real desire to blame the victim that comes from our human need to know why they're suffering, especially out of fear that we will have the same suffering they have. This is usually deeply unconscious. We don't usually know that we're afraid we'll catch their suffering. And so when you talk to someone who's depressed, you might be tempted to say, well, just focus on the positive, think about something positive that happens to you today. And what you won't always realize is you're blaming the victim. You're saying you're depressed because you aren't focusing on the positive. If you would just do what I tell you, you would feel better. And you see somebody, you're visiting someone who has cancer, and you find yourself saying, fruits and vegetables are really healthy, eat more fruits and vegetables. And what you're really saying is you got cancer because you didn't eat enough fruits and vegetables. I mean, it's just a natural thing we do. We want to fix them, and we're scared, and unconsciously we think their cancer is going to rub off on us. And blaming the victim is coming up in the upcoming lessons. Something bad's happening to you, and so it must be your fault. So you want to look out for that when you're talking to people who are suffering.
Janet, even ourselves, the first 2 or 3 years of suffering from Parkinson's disease, I would rack my brain trying to figure out what in the past did I do? Was it those parties in college? Was it farm chemicals? What was it that gave me Parkinson's disease? But you never come up with the right answer. And so you just have to let it go. There isn't any answer. God's still with me, but I can't pretend I don't have Parkinson's, but I know God's with me.
You said the perfect thing, God's with me. That's what you want to say to someone who's suffering is, I'm here right now and God's with you all the time. That's the message. Yep.
Praise be to God.
Well, we're getting toward the end of our time. I have a little rearranging of computer stuff here so that Pat and I can sit in the family room and attend worship at 11. So thank you all for coming. And next week, we'll start with chapter 3. That's the beginning of the poetic section of the book. And we'll see Job's friends trying to convince him that, Job, you must have done something wrong.